and welcome to January 2021, and that means lockdown number 3, and that means once again the schools have gone remote and learning has transferred to online. And schools as an actual thing only remain open to vulnerable students, that's students of key workers maybe, and those students that are finding it hard to learn at home for whatever reason. As well as school education going online, university education has also gone online. And that means for me this month I gave my first university session over Zoom from this very classroom, transmitting myself to the Institute of Education in central London. For a number of years now I've delivered a session on arranging and composing and conducting school orchestras and school ensembles. So this time I did the arranging session, which we're calling Leading a School Ensemble on this time. I did that, as I say, in a remote fashion over Zoom, hoping to do the conducting session in June of 2021, by which time hopefully face-to-face teaching will have returned and more people will have been vaccinated, maybe even myself, and we can do conducting face-to-face. It's going to be very difficult, I think, to create a remote ensemble and teach people to conduct and give them conducting experience if they want it in an online way. So what follows is just a short extract of that Zoom session on arranging for school orchestras and school ensembles. So to explore beyond the confines of the course and beyond the world of COVID, why you might do your arrangements and or compositions, with the eye to working with younger instrumentalists, how to start and what to do. There will be a chance for you later on to share your ideas and think through your repertoire in your second placement schools. When I've done this in the past, I think this is possibly year number 8 of doing this. Normally I would, I'd be with you in the institute and we would be getting into groups. I have done versions where I've even brought students with me. We lose that sort of that immediate practical bit, but I'm hoping that we will be able to, I'll give you time to sign out of the Zoom call and then sign back in later on, so you can talk us through and maybe even play us through just the broadest sweep of how you might approach an arrangement or a piece, and then just the general hints and tips for the future. I share these with you not as necessarily the right or wrong answer. I'm not sure there is one, but it's just sharing of my experience. As Kate said, I've been in schools a long time. I've been in the school I'm working in 20+ years now, and certainly in the last 5 or 6 years I've been working with education outreach departments to create arrangements that can be played in all kinds of school settings, from sort of what I would call a mixed ability ensemble, through to something approaching a standard an orchestral group as you might recognize it, but also including things to do with classroom ensembles, things to do with SEND students. So it's quite broad ranging. I've arranged stuff, which is kind of how it started, and I'm now moving more towards writing my own things, which is kind of how I'd quite like this to go in the future. But obviously, again, we're on pause. The education departments are planning for a return to normality, but we're not quite there yet. So there's lots of plans afoot, but they're sort of in hibernation at the moment. So here's some ideas about why you might do your own arrangements, in the sense that you can be wholly inclusive. So writing for specific players that you will know and will involve all the ages and abilities. My own school ensemble, I know those students incredibly well, and it isn't long before I'm writing the piece for them, and I know that X student can do a particular thing, or Y student enjoys a particular thing, or has a particular interest in a style of music. So I try and gear what I'm writing, what I'm arranging, to be as inclusive as possible. And I tend to get people into Preston Manor's school orchestra, which is once again on pause. The moment they can play a handful of scales, they can join, and if they've only been learning a year, 6 months to a year, they can join in and get that sense of belonging. Student voice is helpful. You may wish to consult your players about what they might like to play. That doesn't necessarily mean they should play it, because you might want to push them into boundaries, push them towards things that they might not know. But a student voice exercise is useful. They will certainly be motivated if they feel they have a voice in this process. And again, I sort of touched on it already. Equal opportunities, depending on what your placement schools have and what they do, would they otherwise have access to the greats of symphonic repertoire, or film music, or jazz music, or pop music, or whatever style of music it is, world music, folk music. I'm sorry, I apologise to bring this in so early, but Ofsted would think about that now as cultural capital. They define it as words along the lines of exposing students to the best of thought and creativity and work in that way. I would phrase that with a question now is, with the aftermath of the kind of the Black Lives Matter movement through last summer, moving, in America and moving to this country, that definition of cultural capital is moving a little bit towards, okay, that's great, but whose culture? Certainly in school, we have a BAME excellence and equality think tank. So we're starting to think about, cultural capital is great. It is absolutely, we should be exposing our students to the best of, however we see the best of, but let's also consider now whose culture we're actually thinking about. And actually, final point on this slide, I think the results can be amazingly satisfying. I've done this for an awful long time, and I still enjoy 20 years on. I'll sit in my study at home, or I'll sit in my office at school or whatever, and I'll grab 5 minutes and I'll start an arrangement, or I'll start a piece of music and I see it through. I'm rehearsing it with the students. We go through it. There are peaks and troughs. If it's a difficult piece, they'll get it. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes the rehearsal will go badly, but other times it will go amazingly. I can usually tell when students enjoy it, actually, because the thing gets learned in twice the speed. But it is very satisfying to know that I've started by myself with my computer, or in the good old days, a piece of manuscript paper and a pencil, and I've taken that right through. I've done the arrangement, I've rehearsed the arrangement, and then we're 4 months later potentially in front of an audience playing that, and the students are sharing what they've learnt, what they've played in their ensemble with their families in the audience. So that's a process still 20 years I still find very enjoyable and very satisfying. So thinking about where do you start, particularly if you've never done this kind of thing before, where can you start and what can you do? So your practical considerations are, obviously at its most basic, think about a piece to arrange, or with, I understand several composers in the group, compose your own. And over the years, I've delivered this session and helped students with this session, including my own mentees and sort of the broader group. There are a few original pieces, mostly arrangements, that's fine. But if we do have composers in the cohort, then absolutely consider composing your own. So once you've thought about what you're going to do, where you're going to start, and are you going to consult your student body, your players, as to what that might be, then you need to start thinking about, actually, okay, what have I got? What's the playing experience? What grades do they have? And are there students that access their music in a different way? They might not, people might be playing in ensembles or bands or groups that, there might be the sort of the YouTube learners, the self-guided learners. They might not have been through a graded system or a sort of formal approach, but they will have something to contribute to your ensemble. My experience is with this is to always push, never underestimate what a group of students can do, whether that's a group of students in an orchestral or ensemble type situation, or whether that's based in a classroom or it's a hybrid of the two. Over the years, I've done some things that I certainly, when I first started teaching, I thought would never be possible. I've done school's version of the Rite of Spring, if you can imagine something like that, if you know the classical repertoire, Stravinsky. Within the last year, for English National Opera, they had, even though the War Requiem is really technically an oratorio, they did create an operatic staged version of Benjamin Britten's War Requiem, and I did a version of that, which is possibly one of the most challenging things I've ever done in terms of making an arrangement in the first place, and then actually having to deliver it and to conduct it. I think I did more conducting practice in the run-up to those performances than I'd done since I was a student. So never underestimate what your students can do. Always see if you can push them. If they're at the start of their musical journey, just that little step forwards. If they're more experienced, if they're older, if they're sort of sixth form, okay, can you push them towards the kind of skill set that might be required for a university or for a music college, or a sort of contemporary music style institute? Obviously, with the COVID world, you probably should consider, and Kate's touched upon this already at the start of the session, how you're going to rehearse in a blended world. And by that, I mean where you've potentially got students in school, and then you've got groups of students at home. How are you going to include them in rehearsal processes? Are you going to create resources for them? Are you going to Zoom them in? How are you going to tackle that? That's a real art form, both in terms of just teaching generally and rehearsing ensembles as well. To blended, it's the hardest, I think, of the scenarios we're working in, man. That's the hardest one. It's easy when they're all in. It's easier when they're all at home, because you know where you stand. It's when you've got half the people with you and half the people not with you. That's where you need to think. Another thing that Kate's also touched on is give yourself enough time, particularly in this sort of COVID world where we don't know what's around the corner, what's going to change, what announcement the government are going to drop on us next. So definitely give yourself enough time, if only in a sort of post-COVID world and beyond the needs of the course. You're going to have to produce a score and a set of parts. which will all need checking, proofreading and printing and possibly photocopying. I think, you know, one of my slightly silly top tips, actually, but it's still valid, is never leave your photocopying to the day you need it. And never leave it to the half an hour before the rehearsals. Always do it the day before, because you can bet your life the photocopy will be jammed. And of course, all the other things presented by COVID about, including self-isolation and all those kind of things.
Lower end woodwinds, so flutes will be weaker. So I mentioned conical bore instruments. So clarinet is low and soft. You're probably not going to hear it. It's not going to be very reliable. Low and louder is fine. Try and avoid breaks between registers. Clarinet one is the example. Obviously, you can move across it, but don't stay there. So try and avoid that kind of thing. That's another good one to talk to a player. Where are they comfortable playing? Where are your students comfortable playing in the range of their instrument? What's going to work? So can you take that in consideration, but still balance the